Hello friends, my name is Yevhenii, I'm from Ukraine. I'm watching my video using this service, since my pronunciation of the English language does not allow me to do it myself. Thanks for understanding.
The 566th day of the war between Russia and Ukraine continues. The General Staff announces the success of the Ukrainian armed forces in the Robotyne area on the Melitopol sector of the Zaporizhia front. We had success in the areas to the south and southeast of Robotyne and are consolidating the achieved positions, said General Staff Speaker Andriy Kovalev. According to him, Russia is trying to restore units there and continues to storm the positions of the Ukrainian armed forces. Defense forces repelled more than 10 attacks in the Robotyne and Novodanilivka areas. I note that Novodanilivka is located in the rear of the Ukrainian troops, several kilometers north of the front line. Meanwhile, Ukrainian telegram channels write that the Ukrainian armed forces are advancing south of Robotyne and are fighting in the vicinity of Novoprokopivka. I would like to return once again to the changes on the map of the Ukrainian military resource deep state in the period from September 8th to 10th. Let me remind you then that Deep State denied the Russians' advance, saying that these were simply clarifications of the map. At the same time, Russian reports widely claimed that these are advances of their troops as a result of a counterattack. Pro-Russian expert Surya K-Maps also write about this, reporting that while the Ukrainian army continues its offensive to the south and east of Robotyne, the Russian army launched a counterattack and managed to recapture a number of positions north of Verbovy. If we assume that the Russians managed to recapture the territory northwest of Verbovy as a result of a counterattack towards which the Ukrainian armed forces were moving, then it turns out that they are trying to create a threat of cutting off the Ukrainian forces that are advancing to the south. Let me remind you once again that Ukraine did not confirm this. The CBS story shows a report from a secret command center in the Pentagon where specialists are daily analyzing the situation in Ukraine, in particular the offensive of the Ukrainian army in the south. The advance of Ukraine's armed forces is slower than people expected. But that's the difference between a war on paper and a real war. Real people really die and real cars really explode, so people tend to slow down in such situations. But they are determined and progress every day, said Joint Chiefs Chairman Mark Milley. This center also collects intelligence information about the Russian army, which is transferred to Ukraine. Neither side has currently achieved its political goals through military means. And the war will continue until one or the other side achieves these goals, or until both sides decide that it is time to come to the negotiating table, because that they cannot achieve their goals through military means, Milley said. Also in the CBS TV story, Mark Milley showed the progress of the Ukrainian armed forces on a map. Judging by this map, the main Russian fortifications are located south of the current front line. Other footage shows Russia building new defenses and strengthening existing ones as the Ukrainian army advances in the south. Satellite images show new trenches dug 10 kilometers from the current front line. Meanwhile, Bild military analyst Julian Rock states that the liberation of the village of Robotyne did not lead to a breakthrough of the Ukrainian armed forces on the Zaporizhia front. For me, the probability that this year during the Ukrainian counteroffensive will be able to reach the Sea of Azov is less than 10%. The fact that at least one large city in the south will be liberated is less than 30%. The reason for this is a number of misconceptions. Not only is that Western tanks will be a tactical advantage. I thought so too, but it was a false conclusion, given the minefields, kamikaze drones, and drone-controlled artillery. But also that Russian lines, as in 2022, can be broken at one point, and then the occupation troops will hastily flee, the expert wrote. Robotyne was the first success, but by no means a strategic breakthrough. Equally heavy battles near Verbovy and Novoprokopivka, as well as Russian counterattacks to the north, show that it was still just another village. A worthy success, but nothing more at present. I see no reason why current and future battles will not continue for 5 to 10 weeks per village, Rock said. In addition, in his opinion, Russian orders to stand to the death could create a situation in which the Ukrainian army's achievement of Polohay and Tokmak will not lead to their quick liberation following the example of Kherson or Kupiansk, but to the same months-long battle of destruction as for Bakhmut. South of Bakhmut, according to Deputy Defense Minister Anna Maliar, the Ukrainian armed forces are having partial success in the area of Klishchiivka and Andriivka. The Russians unsuccessfully tried to break through the defenses of the Ukrainian army in the area of the same Klishchiivka and Orakovo-Vasilivka. In the Telegram channel Bakhmutsky Demon, the Ukrainian military fighting in this direction reported today that in Klishchiivka the Russians were given the task of regaining control over the lost positions, so they pulled up resources and now things are happening there. At the same time, according to them, now our guys are holding all positions. U.S. Secretary of State Blinken said on September 10 that the Ukrainian authorities are ready to negotiate with Russia to end the war. When it comes to negotiations, it takes two to tango. And so far we have seen no signs of any interest in diplomacy on Putin's part. If he shows interest, then I think the Ukrainians will be the first to enter into negotiations, and we will be right behind them. Everyone wants this military conflict to end, but it must end on fair and sustainable terms that reflect the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Ukraine, Blinken said. It is clear that Blinken had something slightly different in mind in his high-profile statement. Namely, Kyiv and the West are ready to negotiate with Russia on their own terms, that is, the withdrawal of Russian troops from the territory of Ukraine. But Putin is not ready to agree to these conditions, and therefore there are no negotiations. However, the form in which Blinken's statement was made is in itself remarkable, as it creates the impression that Ukraine is ready to negotiate, but Putin is not. This, by the way, contradicts the statements of the Ukrainian authorities that the Kremlin is seeking the resumption of negotiations. It is also interesting that this statement was made after Blinken's trip to Kyiv, where, according to some American experts, some politicians are already thinking about freezing the war. Let me remind you that last fall in Ukraine a decision was made to ban negotiations with Russia while Putin is in power there. This ban has not been lifted. Today, Putin commented on the words of U.S. Secretary of State Blinken about Ukraine's readiness to begin negotiations if Russia is ready for them. If Kyiv is ready for negotiations, let him say so himself. If the United States believes that Ukraine is ready for negotiations, then let them cancel Zelensky's decree banning them, Putin said. In his opinion, the West, during the counteroffensive, is pushing Ukraine to gnaw off as much as possible part of its territory and then begin negotiations. According to Putin, Moscow cannot stop hostilities and sit down at the negotiating table while Ukraine is carrying out a counteroffensive. Also, yesterday, Kremlin Speaker Peskov said that Russia, at hypothetical negotiations, will demand recognition of the existing realities, that is, the annexation of Ukrainian territories. Friends, preparing these daily reports has become my full-time job. If these reports are important to you, please click the like and subscribe buttons. Also, if you want to support my work, if possible, financially, you can find the links in the description under the video. Thank you very much and see you in the next video.